Good afternoon, scholars. We've made it to Friday. You've put in a week of hard work, and we've got one assignment to go for this week. I've got so many good things to share. I've had so many good things to read and write and discuss when it comes to seventh grade. You guys are really, really stepping up at this time, and you're acting like a group of mature eighth graders who are fully trying to get prepared as ready as they can for success in high school. And so many of you are on that right track, as we're going to see. Here's one example. Our We went up 7% yesterday's in our turn-in rate. I've been grading your work today. Miss McKinney has the day off because she's moving. She's moving into a cool new apartment that she's really excited about. So she's got the day off. So I've been working through the grading. It's going to get to you a little bit late. I'm going to work through it throughout today and maybe even a little bit tomorrow. Um, Most of the assignments I've seen, I've been really pleased with. Your summary of what happened to Dave have been good, and our breakdown of whether you feel the theme that London was teaching through Dave's death was a theme about life or a theme about death. I've been pretty pleased with the responses there. If you get below a 70% on this or any assignment, that's really a reflection of extremely poor effort on your part, because so much of the grading rubric is weighted to help you. So much of it is just completion and effort, guys. It's really difficult to get below a C unless you really put no effort whatsoever. Another reminder: if you're flat out not turning these in, we know who you are, and if you're getting below C's on these, you're going to be redoing these assignments to the best of your ability. When you come back in the fall, rather than go to clubs, rather than go to team time, you're going to be making up all the work that you missed out on from Vista Virtual. So just a quick plug. Let's look at some of the exemplar answers. For number 2, I'll just kind of summarize that one. Actually, no, I'll show you mine. No. So for number 2, let's look at let's check out Amir's. Amir M. Amir, good job on this assignment, dude. Amir said he was sick and they wanted to arrest him, but he refused to be taken out. And he didn't want another dog to do his work. And to stop them from leaving, Dave bitten through both of Solek's traces and continued on while limping on one of his hind legs. And when he couldn't walk anymore, they shot him and put him out of his memory, his misery. Yeah, that's a good summary. As long as your summary is included, Dave is hurt. You might have included they don't quite know what it is, because there's nothing obviously physically wrong with him. It's something on the inside. They take him out of the traces to try to give him a rest. He refuses and makes things hard on himself. He could have run behind the sled where it's nice and easy. Everything's packed. He's got nothing to pull. But instead, he's running in the fresh, difficult snow, trying to get back into his spot. You definitely should have included that he bit through the traces to try to, as a desperate way to try to get back to his spot. And obviously, the most important part of what happened to Dave was when he couldn't go on, he was shot and killed, and they kept going. So this gets to what London was trying to show us through Dave's example. I've got one scholar who's going to argue that this is a message about how having a purpose, it makes life worth living. Dave clearly had a purpose in his life that he was passionate about. And let's look at that one first. This one's from Diana. She said, London's intention is to teach about life, on how having a purpose makes life worth living. Dave was a sled dog who liked to be a leader, and he felt that that was his place, which made it difficult as he got sick. After Dave had bitten the traces, London says on page 44, quote, he pleaded with his eyes to remain there. The driver was perplexed. His comrades talked of how a dog could break its heart through being denied the work that killed it, and recalled instances they had known where dogs too old for toil or injured had died because they were cut out of the traces. London is showing that Dave is telling the owners that he still wants to work, and the interaction that Dave has towards that the owners has towards Dave is sympathy, knowing that he likes to work and he is left broken with pain. In page 43, Dave's place is taken by Solex because Dave is in pain. Quote, Dave resented being taken out, grunting and growling while the traces were unfastened, and whimpering broken-heartedly when he saw Solex in the position he had held and served so long. London was showing how Dave feels is hurt in the inside because he is being put in a position he doesn't want to be. His purpose is to be a sled dog, and he lives up to that, but he's not ready to give it up, so it tears his heart knowing that he is not a leader. He knows his place is to be a leader. One thing I want to highlight about Diana's writing is her context that she gives. There are so many different quotes that you could have pulled that would piece together the context for you, but there's too many quotes. That was one of the main things I saw in a lot of other writings. It's way too many quotes, too long of a quotes. So Diana did a good job summarizing what you needed to know in her own words before going to her quotes. What she also did a really good job at is if you look at the green, this is a habit that it's really exciting to see you guys develop. Notice that Diana is writing about the author as she does her analysis, right? Because that's what analysis is. You're breaking down the author's work, what it shows and what it means. And so just by mentioning the author in your analysis is a real step in the right direction towards writing better analysis. And that's been kind of our struggle and focus point for the whole year. So I can't tell you how good it feels to see that you're getting better at this difficult skill while we're faced with these difficult times and you're learning from home. But so many of you are demonstrating extreme and impressive growth as writers from your laptops at home. It's awesome. It tells me, it shows me that you're getting ready for high school, but really you're getting ready for college because you're doing killer work at home studying on your own, which is like 90% of what college learning is. Here is Catherine arguing that the theme is more about death. London's intention is to teach the reader a lesson about death, and the message is that life goes on without you, no matter what you contributed. In The Call of the Wild by Jack London, all of the dogs are suffering from tiredness, and Dave is the one who suffers the most. He is at his dying point and is depressed. The drivers can't figure out what is wrong with him, and they know that something inside of Dave is wrong. Quote, Dave was die anyways. Dave was to die anyway, that he should die in the traces, heart easy and content. Page 44, Jack London. You don't need to put Jack London every time, Catherine. This shows Dave was dying, so he was allowed to die doing what he loved most. Even though Dave was dying, he still gave it his best effort when running or pulling the sled and never gave up. London is showing the second part of the theme, no matter what you contributed, by showing Dave was in pain and dying, but he still gave his best effort no matter how many times he fell. Quote, a revolver shot rang out. The sleds churned along. Notice right here. Did you add that ellipses yourself, Catherine? Hold up. Catherine added that ellipses herself. This is a killer move. The revolver shot rang out. Here's what the book says. A revolver shot rang out. The man came back hurriedly. The whip snapped. The bells tinkled merrily. The sleds churned along. See, she cut out some in between because it wasn't as necessary. It wasn't what she wanted to show. What she wanted to show was a shot rang out, and then the sled started moving. She cut out the in between about the man hurrying back and the bells tinkling because it wasn't necessary. And she knew this is going to be too long if I put in these unnecessary sentences. So she cut them out, and she shows she's not trying to lie or she's not trying to trick anybody, because by putting these ellipses, these dot dot dot, she's telling the reader, hey, there's some in between stuff here that's not really important to what I'm trying to show you. Killer move. Okay. Again, if you want to jot this down, scholars taking notes for their feedback and who are going to take notes for, which is all of you, for your reading, that move right there is a boss move, and the move is replace unnecessary filler sentences with ellipses, dot dot dot. Replace unnecessary filler sentences with dot dot dot, because she wanted to use the first sentence and then a few sentences afterwards. So she cut out the in between filler sentences and just dot dot dot. It saves space, and it also makes your quote more powerful because it just says exactly what you want it to say and nothing extra. Okay, let's get back to her analysis. This shows that in the end, Dave died in pain, but doing what he loved most, and was shot because he could not continue with the pain. This also reveals that London is showing the first part of the theme, Life Goes On Without You, by showing and describing the extreme pain and effort Dave put into pulling the sled and running, but he was still left behind and killed. The dogs that were part of his team did nothing and continued to pull the sled, knowing what had occurred behind them. In conclusion, London's intention is to teach the reader a lesson about death, that life goes on without you, no matter what you contributed. He achieves this by showing and describing the extreme pain or effort Dave put into pulling the sled. However, he was still left behind and killed. So yeah, the big takeaway from Diana's was she gave good context, and she is mentioning London in her analysis. Catherine's doing the same thing and mentioning London in her analysis. And remember, analysis is naming what happened or what the person or author did and how they did it. Look at Catherine's conclusion. She nails that. She says the what, London's intention is to teach the reader about death. How he achieves this by showing, describing the extreme pain and effort that Dave put into pulling the sled. Okay, so that's the what, that's the how, and she's talking about the author. Tons of great moves you can steal from this, and I'm looking forward to getting to the rest of your writings. I've only graded about 12 so far, so I know there's some gems that are still waiting to be graded that I'm looking forward to getting to. Let's get into today's lesson. Today, they finish this journey with the male team has been just completely exhausting. As you can see, it killed Dave. All the dogs are just dead tired. They're gonna get into this town, Skagway, and Buck's gonna get some new owners because this is the life of the sled dog. They don't seem to ever stick with one person. They just they're bought and used and sold and bought and used and sold. So we're gonna learn. We're gonna really focus the last part of our lesson today on who these new owners are. But first, let's just get to the first. Oh, my feedback for the day. I got a lot of really responsible students emailing me and texting me about there was no feedback of the day. You were right. My bad. I'm sorry. The feedback for today is I want you to continue embedding keywords into your writing. continue embedding key evidence into your writing. And when I say embedding, that's not a whole quote, it's just key words. So let's just stick with that. Continue embedding key words, phrases into context and analysis. So as you're just summarizing what happened, throw in some words, some keywords from London into your own words. And then as you're doing analysis, because our third question, how does London characterize new owners? You have to name what kind of people he's showing us they are. So in your analysis, throw in some keywords that help you prove your point of what kind of person London shows them to be. Okay, we're being very judgmental today, but that's what we do normally in literary analysis. Okay, so the key feedback is continue embedding keywords or phrases into context and analysis. Okay. All right, here we go. I need to delete the box. We are picking up in a new chapter. Chapter 5, I believe. Chapter 5, The Toil of Trace and Trail. The first question we're looking for is what state or what physical condition is the team in as they arrive at Skagway? And embed at least 2 words or phrases into just your summary of how they're doing. 30 days from the time it left Dawson, the saltwater mail. Start over. 30 days from the time it left Dawson, the saltwater mail, with Buck and his teammates at the fore, arrived at Skagway. They were in a wretched state, worn out and worn down. Buck's 140 pounds had dwindled to 115. The rest of his mates, though lighter dogs, had relatively lost more weight than he. Pike, the malingerer, who in his lifetime of deceit had often successfully feigned a hurt leg, was now limping in earnest. Sol-leks was limping, and Dub was suffering from a wrenched shoulder blade. They were all terribly footsore. No spring or rebound was left in them. Their feet fell heavily on the trail, jarring their bodies and doubling the fatigue of a day's travel. There was nothing the matter with them except that they were dead tired. And it was not the dead tiredness that comes through brief and excessive effort, from which recovery is a matter of hours. It was the dead tiredness that comes through the slow and prolonged strength drainage of months of toil. There was no power of recuperation left, no reserve strength to call upon. It had been all used, the last least bit of it. Every muscle, every fiber, every cell was tired, dead tired. There was reason for it. In less than 5 months, they had traveled 2,500 miles, during the last 1,800 of which they had had but 5 days' rest. When they arrived at Skagway, they were apparently on their last legs. They could barely keep the traces taut, that means tight, pulled. And the downgrades just managed to keep out of the way of the sled. Take a second to jot down what you know you're going to want to say about the state, the condition that they were in. Scan back and look for a few keywords or phrases that you want to just build right into your explanation. So in my notes, I'm going to jot down the overall word that I'm going to use to describe the team, and then I'm going to pull my quotes that I want, the keywords or phrases I want to use. So take a minute to know the word that you want to use to describe the team. Pull out 2 or 3 phrases or words that you want to build into your summary of of how they're doing at this point in the story, and pause me and go ahead and answer this question in number 1. All right. You should have paused me. We're going to keep rolling. Make sure, scholars, as I read, kind of make sure I'm reading with you and not to you. So make sure your eyes are on the words as we read them together, because then you're getting the same exact reading practice that you would if you were reading alone, because your brain's still processing those words, even though it's hearing me read them. You might also get to a word or a phrase that you wouldn't have read like I do, that kind of gives you an aha of how they were to be read. And so that's a learning moment from you that you can get just by following along as I read. Mush on, poor sore feet, the driver encouraged as they tottered down the main street of Skagway. This is the last. Then we get one long rest, eh? For sure. One bully long rest. The drivers confidently expected a long stopover. Themselves, they had covered 1,200 miles of. Oh, actually, pause. What are we reading for now? Oh, why don't the dogs and men get the rest that they deserve after a hard journey? We're looking for the answer for that. Themselves, they had covered 1,200 miles with 2 days' rest, and in the nature of reason and common justice, they deserved an interval of loafing. But so many were the men who had rushed into the Klondike, and so many were the sweethearts, wives, and kin that had not rushed in, that the congested mail was taking on alpine proportions. So, meaning there are so many people who have rushed to Alaska to try to find gold, and they have so many family members back home who are writing to them to find news or to say that they miss them. There's a ton of mail. Alpine proportions. Alpine is a mountain. So if there's alpine proportions, it means like there's mountainous levels of mail that are coming and going because of this rush of gold prospectors. Also, there were official orders. Fresh batches of Hudson Bay dogs were to take the places of those worthless for the trail. The worthless ones were to be got rid of, and since dogs count for little against dollars, they were to be sold. 3 days passed, by which time Buck and his mates found how really tired and weak they were. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, 2 men from the States came along and bought them, harness and all, for a song, meaning for cheap. The men addressed each other as, oh, okay. So you should be able to answer number 2 now. Why didn't the dogs get the full rest that they deserve? They've been resting for 4 days, but that's nothing compared to how exhausted they are, right? They're going to need weeks before they can really recover and be 100%. So what happened? Why didn't they get the rest that they deserve? And even the men who drove them here, they want rest too, but they can't get it. So why don't they get that rest that they were hoping for? Again, try to embed a few words in your summary of why the dogs and the men don't get that rest that they deserved after that hard journey. What happened? Pause me as you jot down your explanation of why, and you pull your couple words that you want to embed into your own explanation. Do it, type it out, and then unpause me, and we'll continue reading a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to pick back up at 3 days passed by at the top of this first paragraph. Now we're getting into the most important work of today's assignment, which is characterizing these new owners that that Buck has. Whenever you're hit with the term characterize, it means to judge. It means um, it means when an author characterizes somebody, the author shows us who they are inside through their actions, through their words, and even through their descriptions of what they look like. Okay, so now is our time to be really judgy. We're gonna meet these new characters. As you meet these new characters, jot down their names, jot down how they're described, jot down how they talk, jot down how they dress, jot down how they act, as we form a judgment about them. By our stopping point, I want you to tell me, how does London characterize them? So how does he show us what kind of people they are? So you got to label them, and then have your evidence of that proves that of your what your judgment is, and have evidence of what they say, what they do, what they look like, that proves your point. Okay. Okay. And again, it's a kind of a judgment word, such as um, brilliant, or um, judgmental, or ambitious, or hateful. It's like you got to label them as people. What label, what characteristic is he most trying to show us about these people? And make sure you're talking about a label that fits all three of them. Don't just focus on Hal or Charles or Mercedes, because that's their names. Don't just focus on one. As a group, how does London characterize them as a group? Okay, here we go. 3 days passed, by which time Buck and his mates found how really tired and weak they were. Then, on the morning of the fourth day, 2 men from the States came along and bought them, harness and all, for a song. The men addressed each other as Hal and Charles. Charles was a middle-aged, lightish-colored man with weak and watery eyes and a mustache that twisted fiercely and vigorously up, giving the lie to the limply drooping lip it concealed. Hal was a youngster of 19 or 20, with a big Colt's revolver and a hunting knife strapped about him on a belt that fairly bristled with cartridges. Cartridges meaning ammo, bullets for the revolver. This belt was the most salient thing about him. It advertised his callowness, a callowness sheer and unutterable. Let's break down some of those words. All right, callow. First, salient. What does salient mean? If something is salient, it is noticeable, okay, or important. Callow, or callowness. I hope you guys use just quick Google searches whenever you come up against words that you don't know. Callowness is lacking and evidencing lack of experience of life. It's immatureness, okay? So if we go back to break down and insert those two words, so the most salient, so this belt was the most important thing about him. It advertised his callowness, his like immaturity in experience. A callowness sheer and unutterable. Both men were manifestly, so mean obviously, out of place. And why such as they should venture the north is part of the mystery of things that passes understanding. So far, what is London showing us about these men? What does he want us to pick up on? How are we supposed to kind of judge them? Take a second to jot down your first impressions of these guys, and then pull a couple words or descriptions that you could steal to prove your point. All right, let's keep going. Buck heard the chaffering, saw the money pass between the man and the government agent, and knew that the Scotch half-breed and the mail train drivers were passing out of his life on the heels of Perrault and Francois and the others who had gone before. When driven with his mates to the new owner's camp, Buck saw a slipshod and slovenly affair. Slovenly means messy. Slipshod means disorganized. They're kind of synonyms. Buck saw a slipshod and slovenly affair. Tent half stretched, dishes unwashed, and everything in disorder. Also, he saw a woman, Mercedes, the men called her. She was Charles's wife and Hal's sister. A nice family party. Buck watched them apprehensively as they proceeded to take down the tent and load the sled. There was a great deal of effort about their manner, but no businesslike method. The tent was rolled into an awkward bundle 3 times as large as it should have been. The tin dishes were packed away unwashed. Mercedes continually fluttered in the way of her men and kept up an unbroken chattering of remonstrance and advice. When they put a clothes sack on the front of the sled, she suggested it should go on the back. And when they put it on the back and covered it with a couple of other bundles, she discovered overlooked articles by which could abide nowhere else but in that very sack, and they unloaded it again. 3 men from a neighboring tent came out and looked on, grinning and winking at each other. "You've got a right smart load as it is," said one of them. "And it's not me should tell you your business, but I wouldn't tote that tent along if I was you." "Undreamed of!" cried Mercedes, throwing up her hands in dainty dismay. "However in the world could I manage without a tent?" "It's springtime, and you won't get any more cold weather," the man replied. She shook her head decidedly, and Charles and Hal put the last odds and ends on top the mountainous load. "Think it'll ride?" one of the men asked. "Why shouldn't it?" Charles demanded rather shortly. "Oh, that's all right. That's all right," the man hastened meekly to say. I was just wondering, that's all. Seemed might top heavy." Charles turned his back and drew the lashings down as well he could, which was not in the least well. "And of course the dogs can hike all day long with that contraption behind them," affirmed a second of the men. "Certainly," said Hal, with freezing politeness, taking hold of the gee pole with one hand and swinging his whip from the other. "Mush!" he shouted. "Mush on there!" The dogs sprang against the breastbands, strained hard for a few moments, then relaxed. They were unable to move the sled. "The lazy brutes! I'll show them!" he cried, preparing to lash out at them with the whip. But Mercedes interrupted. "Guys, why can't he pull the sled? Why can't the dogs move this sled?" "Yeah, it's too heavy." But Mercedes interfered, crying, "Oh, Hal, you mustn't!" And she caught hold of the whip and wrenched it from him. "The poor dears! Now, you must promise you won't be harsh with them for the rest of the trip, or I won't go a step." "Precious lot you know about dogs," her brother sneered. "And I wish you'd leave me alone. They're lazy, I tell you, and you've got to whip them to get anything out of them. That's their way. You ask anyone. Ask one of those men." Mercedes looked at them imploringly, untold repugnance at the sight of pain written in her pretty face. "They're weaker than water, if you want to know," came the reply from one of the men. "Plumb tuckered out. That's what's the matter. They need rest." "Rest be blanked," said Hal, with his beardless lips, and Mercedes said, "Oh," in pain and sorrow at the oath. But she was a clannish creature, and rushed at once to the defense of her brother. "Never mind that man," she said pointedly. "You're driving our dogs, and you do what you think is best with them." Again Hal's whip fell upon the dogs. They threw themselves against the breastbands, dug their feet into the packed snow, got down low to it, and put forth all their strength. The sled held as though it were an anchor. After 2 efforts, they stood still, panting. The whip was whistling savagely when once more Mercedes interfered. She dropped down on her knees before Buck, with tears in her eyes, and put her arms around his neck. "You poor dears! You poor, poor dears!" she cried emphatically. "Why don't you pull hard? Then you won't be whipped." Buck did not like her, but he was feeling too miserable to resist her, taking it as part of the day's miserable work. Pause here, guys. What is the author showing us about these people? And remember, analysis, what and how, okay? What is London showing us about this group of people, these Mercedes, her husband, and her brother? What's he showing us about them, and how? What details or descriptions or dialogue, how is he showing this about these people? Okay, start to jot down some of your first impressions and then scroll back and find those key descriptions, those key quotes that show what you want to prove about these people. Pause if you're not done with that yet. Seriously, take a second to do that and unpause me once you've jotted down what you want to prove and some evidence that's gonna help you prove that. Here we go. One of the onlookers, who had been clenching his teeth to suppress hot speech, now spoke up. It's not that I care a whoop what becomes of you, but for the dog's sakes, I just want to tell you, you can help them a mighty lot by breaking out that sled. The runners are froze fast. Throw your weight against the gee pole, right and left, and break it out. A third time, the attempt was made, but this time, following the advice. Hal broke out the runners. Guys, the runners are just the sleds that are in contact with the ground. Hal broke out the runners which had been frozen to the snow. The overloaded and unwieldy sled forged ahead. Buck and his mates struggled frantically under the rain of blows, meaning he's still whipping them. 100 yards ahead, the path turned and sloped steeply onto the main street. It would have required an experienced man to keep the top-heavy sled upright, and Hal was not such a man. As they swung on the turn, the sled went over, spilling half its load through the loose lashings. The dogs never stopped. The lightning sled bounded on its side behind them. They were angry because of the ill treatment they had received and the unjust load. Buck was raging. He broke into a run, the team following his lead. Hal cried, "Whoa! Whoa!" but they gave no heed. He tripped and was pulled off his feet. The capsized sled ground over him. The dogs dashed up on the street, adding to the gaiety of Skagway, and they scattered the remainder of the outfit along its chief thoroughfare. We'll stop there. What is London showing us about this group of people that now are in charge of Buck and his mates? And how is he showing us? That's your task for the day. I know you guys are going to crush it. I'm so proud of the work that you've been doing. And I will be getting your work from yesterday back to you piece by piece. That's all I got for today. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Do what you did last weekend, which for the first time ever, we saw an increase in turn-in rates over the weekend. So I will see you guys Monday. Have a great weekend.